So I mentioned that one of my first thoughts that I had when I realized the truth of the Eucharist was, God, if you want me to, call me to be a priest. What I didn't mention is my second thought as a beautiful woman walked by was, oh my gosh, she's really cute. So now what do I do? A lot of people seem to have a problem with the fact that the church asks most men to make a promise of celibacy for the kingdom in order to be a priest, to make a promise that they won't get married in order to be a priest. Now, I know that for myself, too, that was kind of a big fear. One of my biggest fears before going into seminary was that I'd be lonely. I just kind of pictured myself if I were to get ordained in this drafty old rectory, sitting in this rocking chair all by myself, looking out the window, the quilt on my lap, just kind of holding my cat. But the reality of the priesthood is very different than that. Because Christ has called me to make a promise of celibacy for the kingdom, He's opened my life up to some incredible friendships, some amazing relationships, as well as allowing me to be available for people if they ever need me at a moment's notice. Still, people will ask me, yeah, but Father, what about sex? Okay, what about it? We'll ask, well, don't you feel like you're missing out? Listen, is celibacy a sacrifice? Sure it is. Are there times when priests miss girls? Of course they do. Is it difficult? Sometimes. But question, since when was something worth doing automatically easy? In Matthew's Gospel, chapter 19, Jesus talks about celibacy for the sake of the kingdom. Despite what you've read or heard, this is not something the church just made up. Me embracing the promise of celibacy for the kingdom is just one more way that I get to love like Christ. Jesus was an unmarried man. I, as an unmarried man, can unite my life and my love to Christ's love and Christ's life and love like Him. Jesus did His greatest work when He was stripped of everything and offered Himself as a sacrifice on the cross. The priest, in persona Christi, is also called to offer his life as a living sacrifice for the church and for the world. As often as he sits there in the confessional, as often as he stands at the altar, the priest is meant to be that victim, that living sacrifice of Jesus. Every good father sacrifices for his bride and for his children, because the priest is the bridegroom to the church, the bride of Christ. That means the church is His bride, and all Christians are His children. He's called to sacrifice His life and His love so that others can have life. I'm here at Mount St. Mary's Seminary, which is one of the oldest seminaries in this country, surrounded by a great group of guys who are all discerning and studying for the priesthood. So the question comes up, isn't it unfair that only men can be priests? I think it's a very good question. And it's actually something that a lot of people feel very strongly about. I would say this, if the priesthood was a power or was a right, then yes, to restrict the priesthood to men would be unfair. But remember, the priesthood isn't about power. It's not about a right. It's about a call to be a father to the people of God. It's the call to stand in the place of Christ the bridegroom to His bride, the church. As a very intelligent person once said, only men can be priests because only men can be dads, and only women can be moms. St. Paul wrote to Timothy, and he called the church the household of God. Well, in this household, only men are fathers. St. Therese of Lisieux, a doctor of the church, wrote that she actually desired to be a priest, but she also realized the truth about a vocation. That vocation means call, and a person doesn't call themselves, God calls them. She realized God was not calling her to be a priest, God was calling her to be a saint. In fact, Mount St. Mary's Seminary is here because one woman, Elizabeth Ann Seton, heard the call from God to say yes to Him with her whole life, to be a religious sister. She said yes, became a saint, and now in this spot, hundreds of men are formed to be priests. Because whenever a man says yes to God, it's a fantastic thing. Whenever a woman says yes to God, it is a fantastic thing. There's a number of Dominican sisters who continually say yes to God with their whole hearts, mind, soul, and strength. Let's hear a little bit about them and their yes to God.
So sisters, you're all very beautiful, intelligent women. I'm sure the question has been posed to you, why can't you become a priest? Or why don't you become a priest? So I'm gonna ask you to explain, why can't women become priests?
People see sisterhood sometimes as a second best, or even just being a woman as a second best, because we can't be priests. And I'm the first to say, no, it's not a second best to be a woman, to be a sister, to be a follower of Christ in my femininity. Why? Because look at the greatest of all creatures. our Blessed Virgin Mother. In no way was she less than the apostles or by the wayside because she couldn't become a priest. She is first and foremost Queen of the saints, Queen of apostles. She is their mother. And how does she do that? Simply by her fiat. Let it be done to me according to your word. And what is that? Not to become a priest, but to be mother, to be God-bearer. And so we as women, we as sisters, do the same thing by bearing God to others in our femininity.
When the Lord calls somebody to service, be it a consecrated religious or a priest, he doesn't take away the gift of motherhood or fatherhood, but they get to participate in spiritual motherhood and spiritual fatherhood. And the Lord actually fulfills their desire and what he made them to be in a more supernatural way.
It pleases me when the students ask, well, why can't I be a priest? Because they're not challenging their faith so as to doubt it. They want to understand it, and they want to explain it to others, and that's a question they get. But underlying that question is a real acceptance of the nobility of the priesthood. So my young women who I teach, they see these men who stand in persona Christi at the altar as Father, giving the graces of Christ to his people. And they say, that is noble, I want to share in that. So what we can help women do, and as consecrated women, we do that, mothers do that, is to show them, as the sisters have said, the gift of their femininity. They already possess the gift of spiritual motherhood. We do not become mothers when we conceive a child. We become mothers by virtue of being women. So everything in them is already crying out to be a mother for souls. So their hunger for souls is not waiting to be realized in the priesthood. It is waiting to be realized as woman.
In our culture, we don't often understand the difference between equality and sameness. While the Catholic Church has always taught that men and women are created equal in dignity, we realize we're not the same. As we said earlier, only men can be dads and only women can be moms. Priesthood, as we learned, is rooted in fatherhood in the Old Testament. Jesus reveals that his New Testament priesthood is the fulfillment of that when he chose only men to be priests. I mean, the very idea that only men can be priests comes because of the reality that Jesus only chose men. Now, while Christ called all Christians, men and women, to be his disciples and to fulfill the Great Commission to make disciples of all nations and bring the gospel to the world, he never chose one woman to be a priest. Now, if he was in error in this, and if his decision has led to 2,000 years of holding back the rights of women to be priests, then this error originated in him. It means that he was wrong. And if Jesus was wrong, then he's not God. We have to understand this. If women should be priests, then Jesus isn't God. Now, someone might argue that Jesus couldn't have called women to be priests because the cultural climate wouldn't allow it. That's actually kind of silly. Almost every religion surrounding Judaism at the time had priestesses. It would only make sense that as Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire, that it would also extend the priesthood to women as well. But they didn't do that because that's not what Christ wanted. Jesus did break social convention in so many other ways, though. He called women to be his full-fledged disciples. The ratio of women to men at the foot of the cross is 3-to-1. The first evangelist, the first person to announce the resurrection of Christ from the dead, was a woman, and she announced it to the first priests. So only men can be priests. Does that mean that women are second-class Christians? In absolutely no way. Who is the holiest person who ever lived? A woman. Mary is the holiest person that God ever made, the holiest saint who's ever walked the face of the earth, and God didn't call her to be a priest. She was called to bring Christ into the world in a different way. Not everyone is called to be a priest. All of us are called to be saints. And when it comes to being a priest or being a saint, be a saint. That's way more important.